I know.
Good afternoon.
Oh my gosh.
Thank you. How's lunch? Is it good? Yeah. Good.
I feel like if it were just me, that reception would have made sense when everyone was just dead silent. I was like, I get that, guys. I get that. Well, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
I know you were
Thanks for having
traveling everywhere.
So I've been on a 35 city tour for the last 7 weeks, 6.5, 7 weeks. We've been out screening the film at some film festivals,
Sure.
At libraries for homeless advocacy groups, and at some shelters. And the idea was to create a grassroots awareness of the film before we ultimately landed in New York and did the mainstream media, which was the Today Show and Fallon and
Sure.
Kelly and Ryan and all of those.
First
Even
name
Rachel Ray.
basis. Yeah, I
Even
love
Rachel
that.
Ray. So yeah, I'm exhausted, and I'm really happy to be back in LA.
Yeah, we're
even
glad
for
to
a
have you.
moment.
Yeah, I was going to say, we get you and then you disappear.
Right.
But yeah, I guess my first question for you, I think that, when you were at the start of your career, you made a lot of movies that resonated with a generation.
Right.
And I think as that generation got older, a lot of the movies that you started to direct and pursue from a writing perspective began to also resonate with us because those kind of grew with us. You started to tackle a little more serious topics and serious things of that nature.
That's right.
Was that an intentional choice, and how did you start kind of making that shift out?
Well, I kind of took a left turn, if
Yeah.
you will, about 20-some years ago. I stopped, I would do one for the studio or two for the studio and one for me. And then it was, all for the studio and none for me. And then I thought, I'm doing Mighty Ducks 3 and I'm miserable. And this is not where I really wanted to be. And so I decided to do movies that spoke to the humanity and to do films that ultimately, and this is where I've arrived, especially during this tour and with this film, The Public, is that if you look at The War at Home, which we did in '95, where I played a Vietnam vet suffering from PTSD, and then Bobby, which was about the day Bobby Kennedy was shot at the Ambassador Hotel here in LA, and really what the world looks like without Bobby Kennedy. Then The Way, which was about a spiritual journey that takes place in the north of Spain along the Camino de Santiago, about grief and loss. And then The Public. All of the movies that preceded The Public inform where we are right now in terms of where I've wanted to go. I believe that none of us walk the planet pain-free. I think that we all have a certain amount of trauma, and it's how we process that trauma or not process it. And it's all about degrees. And so what all of these movies have in common is a shared trauma and shared grief and how we process that.
Yeah. A lot of your movies resonated with me. I've seen so many of them. Before I get into those, I guess you're talking about doing more movies for you. Is there a bigger challenge, I think, in doing some of those independents?
Oh yeah. You see what's going on in movies these days with the studios. And in many ways, they sort of operate like big oil, right? They go out there with their rigs and their drills, and they drill down into your wallets, and they extract enormous amounts of cash, right? When you're an independent filmmaker, you're out there with a divining rod and a shaman, just trying to figure stuff out, and you're just like, we'll get a little money from this person, a little money from that person, and we'll cobble all of these elements together, actors and funding, and a location where you're in a state that provides a tax rebate,
sure.
Which is how we ended up in Ohio and landed in Ohio. And again, the state becomes somewhat of a partner in the making of the film. Yeah. So yeah, they're tough. Independent movies, they're tough not only to get made, but it seems like that's the easy part. The easy part is making it. The tough part is the marketing and the distribution.
So you didn't like going to 35 cities in 7 weeks? That wasn't...
You know what? I love the country. I love this. And I drive a lot. I'm on the road quite a bit. I've got a 12-year-old car. It's got 280,000 miles on it. And I've probably driven 1 million miles around the United States in my lifetime, quite easily. I love this country. I love seeing what's going on out there. And places like Omaha, Nebraska, and Marfa, Texas, and Lawrence, Kansas, and Farmington Hills, just outside of Detroit, and then of course Cincinnati, where I now have I bought an old building. Bought a building that was constructed in 1881, which is significant because, for me anyway, because that's the year that Billy the Kid was shot and killed, if you believe that part of the story. So yeah, built in 81, and it needs a lot of work, and I'm pretty handy, and so I've been doing a lot of the work myself.
So that's
and
like
then
another
having people come
independent.
behind me and fix what I screwed up.
Sure.
Yeah.
I just go right to that, but that makes sense. That makes sense. One of the things I wanted to ask you about was actually Culture Clash in America.
Right.
Really interesting. For those that don't know, Culture Clash is a performance troupe out of San Francisco. They do a lot of different things as they relate to the immigrant experience.
That's right.
You worked with them.
I did. They would be considered like satirists.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. I was curious, like, how did you guys get connected, and what interested you in that project?
Well, I saw a play that they had done downtown, I think at the Amundsen or the Taper, called Water and Power.
Sure.
I met them backstage, and they said they wanted to do a show and film it. And we had a mutual producing friend, and the guy says, "I'll fund it if you want to direct it, and we'll put the show on." So over the course of, I think, 4 nights, we shot the live show all 4 times, and then cobbled together for the best of those four performances.
Wow.
But they're great. I mean, it's Montoya and Salinas and Siguenza, and they're very active, and they're very into it. And I've lost touch with them over the years, but
Sure.
But they're wildly talented. If you don't know who they are, they're 3 extraordinary talents that you should check out.
Yeah, it was. I really enjoyed it. Very hard to find, in case anyone's looking for it.
Well,
Very
I don't know
hard.
if it ever got released.
I had to go to the production company to get it.
Arenas? Was it the Arenas?
Yes,
Yeah,
Arenas,
yeah.
Entertainment, yeah.
Right.
And it was tough. And I was curious, I guess my last question on that, I believe, and please correct me if I'm wrong, that you spent about, I think, 6 months living in Mexico, I think when your dad was shooting Catch-22, is that right?
Right.
So you're looking at me, it's so suspicious.
Where are we going with this?
I was just curious if that experience made you more interested in a project that was talking about the immigrant experience and doing Culture Clash.
Well, no, I never wanted to leave New York.
Yeah.
So we left New York in 1969. It was the only city that I ever really knew. I love New York. It's probably why I'm attracted to Cincinnati, because it reminds me of New York in a smaller way in 1969. There were neighborhoods you could walk. You could be out on the street and feel very comfortable. Even back then, I was just there last week, and if you've been, well, you're from there,
Yeah.
so you know. It's crazy. It's almost impossible to navigate. It wasn't then. And Cincinnati's a lot similar to, very similar to what New York was like then. But no, it was interesting to go to Mexico for that film, because that was directed by Mike Nichols. He was just coming off of The Graduate, and he had everyone in the world in that film, including Orson Welles and Alan Arkin and Art Garfunkel, who I was a huge Simon and Garfunkel. At 6 years old, I knew every song that they had recorded. I was a wild fanatic of Simon Garfunkel. And now Art Garfunkel's in this movie, and I'm thinking, I'm going to have an opportunity to meet Art Garfunkel. This is going to be insane. This is a dream. And so when we first got there, they put us in a really nice hotel, which we only stayed in for about a week, because my dad had a very small role. So they said, you're going to stay here a week until you get set up in a house or apartment later. So it was great. So I was sitting at a table with my mom and my sister Renee, and right next to us, it was like our table's in the middle, and then there was a 2-top next to us there, and it was Mike Nichols and Art Garfunkel, with like 5 feet away. And my little sister began to eat the butter on the table, a cube at a time. And my mom kept pulling it away, and somehow she got her hands on it again and ate more butter, and then, of course, got sick to her stomach and puked all over the table. Now, of course, I have a gag reflex, which is right. And so, of course, I smelled the vomit, and I turned to Art Garfunkel, and I puked all over the floor. And I remember Garfunkel just sort of looking up from his eggs in absolute disgust and shook his head, and I never met him. I never met him.
He probably remembers
No,
you, though.
He may, and my mom just grabbed both of us and marched us out.
Yeah, that's some
No,
troubled
it's a
water.
Heartbreaking story, of course.
Well, speaking of, I mean, you named a lot of great actors that were in that movie. You happen to employ so many actors in all of your films, especially. I mean, this is an intimidating poster to look at,
Right.
Let alone to actually see this film. But people you've worked with, like Sir Anthony Hopkins,
Right.
you worked with Helen Hunt. The number of people just on this poster alone that
Right.
you've worked with. I mean, is that intimidating at all? I know.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, we were on the set of Bobby, and Shia LaBeouf, who was, relative unknown at that time, pulled me aside and says, "Emilio, I'm so confused. I don't know where to look. I don't know who to stare at. There's so many huge actors on this film. I'm so intimidated." And I said, "Let me tell you something. I am too." Right. Yeah. But I love actors. I love the process. I love ensemble films. I love the films of Altman, and I feel like a lot of what I've been doing lately is influenced by that. But also as an actor, the films that I have really scored in have been ensemble pictures. You look at The Breakfast Club, St. Elmo's Fire, Young Guns, even The Mighty Ducks to a lesser extent have been all ensemble pictures, and it allows you to lean on your fellow cast members. It allows you to sort of pass the ball off and let them run with it for a while. And I think that I'm better suited in an ensemble environment. And so
Yeah.
obviously now creating them for myself.
Yeah, almost every one of your movies is just like a show-stopping person after show-stopping person. Did you take, you were talking about how you were in ensembles. Did you take any lessons from being in ensembles from the directors you worked with and how they kind of wrangled that many talented people?
Well, probably to a certain extent, yeah. I mean, Joel Schumacher did St. Elmo's Fire. John Hughes, of course, Breakfast Club. Those were early movies for me, and of course, you're influenced by your early days.
Sure.
So, yeah, being on the set, watching them work, I would often come to work on my days off just to watch the directors and try to understand their process. I was very interested in directing at a very young age. In fact, I did it when I shouldn't have. I directed my first film. It was dreadful. But I wrote the script, directed it, starred in it. It was a movie called Wisdom. I was 23 years old, and I wanted to be the youngest writer, director, actor in Hollywood. Because Wells had done it with Citizen Kane at 26, and I was like, I got to beat Wells. So just absolute hubris. And so I write the script, and we put this cast together that included Demi Moore and Tom Skerritt and Veronica Cartwright, both from Alien. And who else was in? A couple other actors that you may or may not know. Anyway, so we go off, we make this film. I have this amazing behind-the-scenes talent. Robert Wise, the director of Sound of Music and West Side Story, is my executive producer and on the set every day. Michael Kahn, who's Steven Spielberg's editor, cutting the film. Danny Elfman from Oingo Boingo and the composer. It's his second score after Tim Burton's Pee-wee's Big Adventure. And I stood outside, I think it was the Pantages Theater with my script after an Oingo Boingo concert, like, Mr. Elfman, I'm going to direct a movie someday, and I really want you to do the score, and he did it. Dennis Gassner, who's won several Oscars, was the production designer. Adam Greenberg, who just shot The Terminator, was my DP. I mean, it's ridiculous. It was an embarrassment of riches on this film, and I had a terrible script, and nobody told me, or if they did, I wasn't listening, and so I got my ass handed to me, and to top it, to come back around to the Orson Welles of it all, the LA Weekly did a review, and they devoted a ton of ink to it. I mean, a ton, like 2 pages, and I opened it up. And the headline was, "Ain't no Rosebud."
Oof.
So I was like, okay, I deserve that. Oof. Yeah, no, it was pretty devastating.
Yeah.
Stop reading the LA Weekly.
You don't need a sled in Los Angeles. That's what I've always felt. You know, you don't need that.
No.
I have to ask this. I used to work a lot when I was in high school. I used to do a lot of theater with my sister. I cannot even fathom directing a family member in anything.
Right.
You have worked with both Charlie and your father multiple times.
That's right.
What is it like directing family? Is one of them harder to direct than the other? More intimidating?
Yeah, I mean, they both are.
Yeah.
When you direct family, you know where all the buttons are because you help build the machine. Right. So there were moments where my dad and I would clash on the way, and when we started off on that, my dad's a devout Catholic, and he really wanted the film to be reflective of that. And I said, you know what, we've got to get our arms around it being. Yes, we're on a Christian pilgrimage. It ends on the Camino de Santiago. Yes, you are Catholic, but the character isn't. So can you separate yourself from that? He said no. I said, well, you're going to have to, and you're going to have to fight your instinct to make this a Catholic movie. And in fact, we clashed quite a bit about that because I wanted the film to be accessible to non-Catholics as well. I'm not a practicing Catholic. I am what people would call a work in progress in terms of my faith. I'm more of a humanist.
Sure.
Right.
So was the moment in the way when he receives the rosary beads? Was that
That's
originally
him.
in the script?
Oh, yeah.
That
That was him. Yeah.
Yeah.
He says, "Oh, I want to receive some rosary beads." I was like, "Great, great."
Yeah. And last question before I get to the public, I just have to quickly ask about James Duff's Homefront,
Right.
which you adapted
Right.
into The War at Home.
That's right.
How much more challenging was it to adapt something from an incredible play, one of my favorite plays, to adapt something from that, and a rather challenging play generally into
Now,
a
did you
film?
and your sister play Karen and Jeremy?
I played Jeremy, but not with her.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's great monologue, right?
Super hard to, when you leave every day,
Right.
that feeling doesn't leave you.
Right.
Yeah.
Now you remember the monologue about his friend who kills himself.
Brady.
Yeah. You remember that? It was a long monologue. We filmed it. And for those of you who don't know, it's a story about a Vietnam vet, which I played, which you played as well.
Not as well. Yeah.
Suffering from PTSD in a home in his folks' house in Texas. Kathy Bates played my mother, my dad played my dad, and Kimberly Williams played Karen. And it's a very tough play. I think when it opened on Broadway, Carol O'Connor played Bob, and Frances Sternhagen played the mom.
Okay.
And I think it closed in like 2 weeks. It was not a long run. It was a very, very tough play. So James Duff wanted to open it up for the film, which I thought was a great idea. But it was a very difficult role to not only play, but direct myself playing. And so I did that monologue, which you know, and it was terrible. It was absolutely terrible. And I was just like, okay, the whole movie stops. And so, we say as filmmakers, oftentimes you have to kill your babies. And this was one of those moments where the movie was going along, it's going along, the audience is laughing, they're involved. Now there's this monologue. And it brought the film to a screeching halt. And I stepped back and I said, it's got to go.
Oof.
And that was it. But Duff was... James Duff, if you don't know him, also created the show with Kira Sedgwick called
Closer?
Closer. Yeah,
Yeah,
terrific
shot in the dark.
writer, and was very much a partner during the creation of that.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
I have to get to the public. I have so many questions. The public was inspired by an essay called Written Off by Chip Ward.
That's right.
What drew you about that specific essay that resonated with you? Because I believe this was over 10 years in the making.
That's right. So it was last week was the 12th anniversary of the publication of that piece in the LA Times, April 1st, 2007. And so I read this piece. It was about how libraries have become daytime de facto homeless shelters, how librarians are now tasked with being first responders and de facto social workers. And at the end of the piece, he asked the reader, are you doing enough to remedy this issue of homelessness in America? What can you do? So I stepped back from that and I said, okay, I'm a filmmaker, I'm a storyteller, I might be able to find something here. I was looking for a follow-up piece to Bobby. So I went back to the downtown LAPL, the central branch, to hang out and just observe. And what Ward was talking about was not just localized to Salt Lake City, but it was in fact an epidemic. And so I began to imagine what the story would look like on a chilly night if the patrons staged an old-fashioned 60s sit-in, how the law enforcement would react, how the media might spin it, and if there was a politician in the middle of a mayoral race, how might he spin it for his own political gain? And so imagine over these last 12 years, you're turning on the TV, you're opening up the newspaper, you're going online to read your news, and you're watching all of these stories unfold, including now librarians are trained in the use of Narcan because the overdoses in libraries that's become epidemic.
Wow. One of the biggest themes that I spotted in this movie, which is not hard to spot, is the ideas of climate change.
That's right.
There's everything from the cold snap. There's a discussion earlier in the film between your character and Jenna Malone's character about minimizing your carbon footprint.
Right.
What about that side? Because I know in the original essay it's touched on, but not nearly as much as you went. What drove you to go in as deep as you did on that?
Well, what happened was in the actual location, when we first scouted it, there was no polar bear. And if you haven't seen the movie, there's a polar bear in the middle of the library in the lobby. So that polar bear wasn't there. In fact, the Natural History Museum is renovating in Cincinnati, and they spread out their exhibits all over the city. So for the 3 years, this polar bear, I think his time is up in May. They're going to take him back to the museum. But again, before the polar bear got there, I said, great, we're going to use this library, terrific. Came back with the crew. Now there's this 15-foot polar bear. And I thought, okay, I can't shoot around this. I have to include, I need this lobby. And I said, how can I use this bear to help inform Jenna Malone's character even more? And again, she's a bit of a couchtivist in the film. She's not active except on social media. So she posts memes and she thinks she's doing the right thing. And in fact, she doesn't understand what community service looks like until the end of the movie. She has that woke moment. But it doesn't happen until much later. So yeah, I'm grateful to this polar bear, which the locals in the library had named Barry White.
Of course they did. That makes sense.
Right.
Yeah. I hate this phrasing, but another big character in the film is the Grapes of Wrath. Grapes of Wrath comes up multiple times in the film. Right. One of the quotes that you included was, "Wherever there's a fight, so hungry people can eat, I'll be there."
That's right.
Part of that, when I was watching the movie, kind of felt almost like you were there for the fight after reading Chip Ward's essay. That's why you were there making that, and that was kind of your thematic statement.
I like that.
Oh.
Yeah, no, that's good.
Well, that's our time, guys. But did you see a lot of connections when you were first starting to write The Public between that and The Grapes of Wrath? Did that immediately come to you?
No, Grapes of Wrath didn't immediately land for me. Again, it was the first draft of the script was super didactic, and it was that speech. People are dying on the streets, blah, 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 and it was so on the nose, and it was a platitude that the movie couldn't sustain. And so I said, how can I say the same thing without actually saying it? And to use Steinbeck's words and to have those come back up. Grapes of Wrath is going to celebrate its 80th anniversary this year. It was published April 14th, 1939. So those words are, I believe, as relevant now as they were when he first wrote them.
Yeah.
He was writing about what he saw, which was a great injustice and a great sorrow, and he felt that the failures were being the success that we were experiencing as a country were being overshadowed by these enormous failures.
Yeah. I also noticed that just even around a lot of the pieces in your movies, not only does literature play a part, I've noticed that addiction pops up in a few of your different films.
Right.
Obviously, it's pretty prominent in the public, even down to the cigarettes that I believe the character's name was Sarah was smoking in the way.
Right. But Joost, the Dutchman, was smoking pot throughout the whole thing.
And eating a lot. Not to, just saying.
Right.
Looked good though. I was hungry. What were you hoping that people would take away, I guess, from your commentary on addiction, whether across films or specifically in the public?
Well, I think again we all self-medicate to a certain extent. Some of it is over the counter or over the liquor counter. Some of it is prescription, and some of it is street drugs. Of course, nobody in this room I'm referring to. No.
Of course.
But nor me. But there is a certain amount of self-medication that is very prevalent in the culture, and I think that I underscore it and highlight it in my films because it's again these are movies about people and people who are again dealing with their trauma, and one of the ways that so many of us deal with our trauma is by and through self-medication.
Yeah. This took place in Cincinnati, as you said. Your mother, I believe, was from there.
She's born in Cincy. My dad's from Dayton.
Did either of them get to sneak in anything about their experiences there as they were talking to you, like, I used to love this place in Cincinnati.
No.
Put it in.
No.
No.
No, neither one of them.
Really?
Yeah.
Did you talk to her? Was she really happy that you were putting the movie in Cincinnati?
Well, my mom was born in a home for unwed mothers. And so imagine in 1939, that was a pretty unpopular place to be born in.
Sure.
So her mom really was not, she wasn't ready to be a mom when she had her. And so she was taken across the river to be raised by her grandparents. So her experience in Cincinnati was limited. And I think they've torn down the building where she was born. I was looking all around for her birth records and couldn't find them.
Oh, wow. Obviously, you have so much free time. Yeah.
Exactly.
I have to say I'll never hear I Can See Clearly Now by Johnny Nash ever again in the same way. If you haven't seen the film, you need to. I don't want to spoil anything, but oh boy. How did you choose that song for such a pivotal part of the film?
Well, so out of context, it's tough to talk about because
Yeah.
it plays a part, especially in the ending of the film. But the end of the film was originally going to be a Journey song, and it was "Don't Stop Believing" by Journey, which again used quite often.
Sure.
We hear it in commercials, other films, and so it had been in the script for years. And 2 weeks before we were to start shooting, they said, you can't have it. I said, well, who said it? They said, well, they're just not going to grant the rights. And so I said, what do I need to do? Because I've already learned the song, which my character sings. And so they said, you have to write Steve and Neil and the rest of the group, and you have to beg them. And so I did. I sat on the computer and I crafted this beautiful letter basically saying, I'm begging you. This is what the movie's about. You guys the song's not going to be used in a silly way. They still said no. So I thought, okay, what to do? I was at a friend's house in Cincinnati, and I Can See Clearly Now came on his Spotify or one of them, one of the Pandora maybe, and I said, play that again, play that again, play that again, and it became the song for the end.
Yeah, I can't hear it the same now.
Right, no, of course.
Again, watch it. While we're talking about music overall, this seems to be the first movie that really prominently featured hip hop of the movies that you've done, and also featured one of the bigger names, I think, in hip hop history, and Rhymefest also appears in here. How did you come to incorporating hip hop so much in here and also bringing Rhymefest into the movie?
So Che came to the film in a weird way because he was originally suggested by my mother, who had seen Che in a documentary called In My Father's House. And the documentary was essentially about his reunion with his dad. His dad was homeless for 30 years. When Che finally was able to connect with him, his father said, the only place I'm comfortable meeting you is in the local public library. So they met. They made this documentary. My mom saw it. She said, hey, you're casting. You should know who this guy is. He's a really fascinating character, and he has lived experience, which could actually help you along the way as you're making this film. And so I called Che. We connected. I said, I'm interested in having you be a part of this as an actor. And if you know the song "Glory" that was in the film Selma, he was the third writer on that. So it was Common and John Legend that wrote that, and they won the Oscar and I guess all the awards for that song. So Che said, "I'm game. I want to be a part of this." And then once he arrived, and I Can See Clearly Now was chosen as one of the end songs of the film. He said, "I want to re-record this, and I want to write an original, and I want to write another." So it was like, dude, have at it. I mean, I was into it. So we have 3 original Rhymefest songs in the film. Make Noise he recorded with Tariq Trotter, better known as Black Thought, and they're really good tunes. And you were talking about not being able to find them, but I
Wasn't
think
gonna say anything.
we're going to know. Are they going to be out, Mark? They say today? Today? They're going to be out? Yeah, they'll be out today.
Good. They're great. That's why I was asking. I wasn't complaining. Yeah, and I think that what's interesting is his performance was incredible.
Yeah.
He played one of the people experiencing homelessness.
Right.
I believe that you also brought people who are actually in that position in Cincinnati who are
right.
currently homeless as
right.
part of the film.
Yes, we invited them to participate. And the only criteria was, once you're in this lockdown situation, I need you to come back the next night. You can't just work one day and then take off. I need you to be consistent. And the idea of needing to be counted on made a difference in their lives, and they were counted on, and they showed up. And they were an important part of our overall group.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
And the last question I have for you, I think when we look, this movie is saying a lot of things, and I think it's pulled a lot of people's attention. It's definitely pulled my attention to a lot of what we're facing as a country right now, especially as weather's changing, and a lot of people still don't have a place to be.
Right.
What do you want us as audiences to take away? What can we do?
Well, again, going to the article,
Yeah.
what can we do? What more can we do to help get how can we get our arms around this issue? And especially in Los Angeles, where real estate comes with such a premium. My daughter's been forced to move now 3 times. She got priced out of the LA market. She's living in Long Beach now, where she has a great place, but again, very far away from where she works. Where we've got the money through Measure Triple H, $1 billion for 10,000 units, but we have 57,000 in LA alone. Individuals experiencing homelessness. So 10,000 units doesn't even scratch the surface. What's important is permanent supportive housing. So again, it's sort of a chicken and egg thing, because a lot of neighborhoods don't want that permanent supportive housing in their backyard. So there's the NIMBY issue. Real estate coming with a premium. The people who, like my daughter, who can't afford to live here. So there's the issue of where and how. 25% of those experiencing homelessness are vets. 20% are children. And here's a staggering statistic: 11% of California State college students are couch surfing or living in their car. So, staggering, 11%. So how are you going to get an education if you're just thinking about survival? So the issue is enormous. But when you look at homelessness and you look at what got us to where we are right now, Carter signed the Mental Health Services Act into law in 1980. It was repealed the next year by the incoming administration. So that was a big hit. Then that same administration, under the omnibus budget, cut HUD by 77%. So you had these 2 enormous strikes against the poor and the marginalized and the mentally ill, and that is how we've gotten to ultimately where we are. Clinton's Welfare Reform Act also didn't help. So, but homelessness has only been with us really for 40 years, in earnest. And so if it only took 40 years to get us to this place right now, I believe that we can get our arms around it. And we need to stop bringing our own bias to how we look at people on the street, and stop assigning a story to that individual, because we don't know how they got there. People assign stories to all of us all the time. They assume they know how we live or how we got and arrived at a certain place. we need to stop doing that to when we see an individual experiencing homelessness, and we need to say, that is a person with a name and a face and history, and they need help. And homelessness it's not a condition, it's a situation. And here's another staggering number, and you probably know this, but EA, emergency assistance, for an individual on the street costs $68,000 per year. You put a roof over that same individual's head, it goes down to 15 grand. So, and we all pay for that anyway. So how do we pay less? How do we build the housing? Where do we build the housing? And those are the big questions that we need to get our arms around, because I'm not okay with it. I don't think anybody in this room is okay with it. Mm-hmm. You can't be immune living in this city where there is such immense wealth and not be. It's heartbreaking what's going on. That the discarded and the marginalized and the disenfranchised and the poor, they need our help, and I think it's criminal on our part not to figure out how to solve this.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for your time today. I
Thank
really,
you.
really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Great having you here.
Appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you.